integrity, and respect Missouri voters, state organizations working to make government and politics more accountable to the people. To all of
So,
our coalition members who are watching live, please stick around to the end of the episode. And after we end the recording, we're going to get to have a private Q&A with our guest.
yes. And today, super excited to share that um, this idea of wanting to expand and strengthen the ballot initiative process has expanded. Our coalition partners are now running proactive ballot initiatives in several states to both save but also strengthen and make stronger ballot initiative processes, including in Missouri, and trying to fight back to make sure that the will of the people is listened to over politicians. But getting to today's episode and the meeting with all of you guys, I am so thrilled to be joined today by Jamie McDonald. She's a civic reformer, a movement builder, a co-board member with me at the national organization Issue One. She currently serves as the co-chair of the Council for American Democracy, and really, as a co-chair of that effort, has been able to show that there are sometimes movements just waiting to be uncovered. So I'm super excited to have everybody get to learn a little bit more about that, and not only the movement building success, but also the fundraising success that has been coming with the Council for American Democracy. So welcome, Jamie. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Katie, and hi, Benjamin.
Awesome. So Jamie, we're super excited and can't wait to hear more about your journey in general in the civic space, civic philanthropy, pro-democracy movement today that, we were just talking about before we started recording. Still consider yourself an everyday citizen, even though now you have maybe you're more in the fight for trying to make a government for, by, and of the people. A lot of times on this podcast, we are highlighting folks who have ran campaigns in the political space before, and your story is a little different, which I actually think is great for us to be able to learn lessons from. So you've been working on a great idea to both fund and fuel a movement. We're so excited to dig into that. But can you first tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your professional background, and then maybe a little bit about that moment for when you did decide that maybe voting wasn't enough and there was more to be done in relation to democracy?
Sure. So great to be with everybody. And it's an honor to have a chance to have a conversation with two people that are on the ground in the fight, really at the level of the voters, which is not where we kind of sit in terms of the work that we're doing. As I said, I am, as far as democracy professionals go, I am really a new entrant into this as something that I'm spending quasi-professional time on. As my husband has told me, I have failed retirement, which I attempted to do about a year and a half ago. And I, for many reasons, which I'll share in a second, I'm just very passionate about this work to renew our American democracy. At the risk of going too far back, I do think it's worth saying that part of the reason I feel so connected to this is I feel like I myself am somebody who is a true beneficiary of some of the things in government that work. My mother had me at 19, divorced. I think we were able to build a reasonably stable life because of, things in government that worked. I went to an incredible inner city public school in Philadelphia. I went to college and grad school with, government grants, and I have immigrant grandparents, one who was a bit butcher and one who was a lifelong government servant who served as a machinist in the Frankfurt Arsenal in Philadelphia. And I don't know, I just think my family's story is very much an American story. And so I think we grew up, and I would say especially my grandfather, who was the machinist, he was this quiet guy who was not very demonstrative, but, he was fiercely patriotic. And if you ever have a chance, I wrote about him on LinkedIn not long ago, because I don't know, it just hit me one day that like I've never thought of myself in like the 2020s version of patriotism, because it has become so charged. But I grew up in this very I think traditionally classically patriotic household. And my mother was really liberal, like, 1960s activist. Like the first government or the first democracy thing I ever did was I leafleted for McGovern on the corners in Center City, Philadelphia. And obviously it was a flaming failure. And I got to watch my mother's, like how she processed that. And that has always really stuck with me. So I don't know, a little bit of like a personal backstory just to set the stage. But professionally, I've really had I guess maybe now with democracy, a 4-part journey in my professional trajectory. And so the first 17 years of my career as an investment banker, having grown up poor, my number one aspiration when I got out of grad school was not to be poor. I really didn't have like a huge focus other than that. I wasn't trying to be a doctor or a lawyer. I was just like, okay, well, what can I do that will make me not poor? And, like Jesse James, go where the money is. And so that was like step one in my career. And when I felt I was stable and we had a family by that point, and I was yearning for what was next, I actually started a software company that was focused on civic engagement and community building. I'd been on a ton of nonprofit boards. And I would say this is the closest I've come, running this company to doing campaigns, so to speak, because what we built, we launched in early 2011. The company was called GiveCorps, and we basically built an engine for local causes and local nonprofits to put up an urgent need, and for people in communities locally and ultimately nationally to be able to support those causes, not just with money, but with goods, with activation, with volunteering. So sort of this whole way of helping a nonprofit that was trying to address a very specific or a cause that was trying to address a very specific need to sort of rally the public to support the need. And then that work led me to get involved with movement building writ large, because what we learned was how you rally small communities. In that work to rally small communities, I stumbled onto GivingTuesday in its very first year when nobody had ever heard of it. And I'm going to make a very long story short, but basically we ran the first large ever GivingTuesday campaign in Baltimore. We raised $5 million in a day on the second GivingTuesday, back when nobody had really heard of it. And we did it across about 200 organizations, and we generated 32,000 civic actions all in this day. And this campaign that I led in Baltimore with a coalition of partners put me on the map with GivingTuesday and put GivingTuesday on the map with the country. And I was we were one of like 5 organizations that year that did something really big and started that ball rolling for GivingTuesday. But that work started to really then connect me with other movement builders, and particularly city movement builders, which is an interesting, as many of you probably know if you're really at the local level, civic movements have a very particular persona, because you have some common language around your sports teams and your neighborhoods and whatever your special things are in your city. And that's a learning, I think, that I try to bring to all movements that I think of, is like, what are those touchstones of belonging? And then when I sold my company, I sold it to Network for Good, which some of you know if you're in the nonprofit world. And then I basically worked on civic and other movements, some on behalf of GivingTuesday and some on my own around the world for the next, I guess, 8 or 9 years. And I had one other entrepreneurial thing that I was kind of working on at that same time for the last couple of years, but then I retired because my husband has Parkinson's. And so that's another way that I feel like I touch democracy and government, and in particular in this administration because of all the cuts to science and medical trials and all of that, because we are very much in the fight for Parkinson's. And, you know, this is very close to our hearts, what's happening with science. And I got connected to Issue One because one of my investment banking colleagues is a longtime founding board member at Issue One and launched this thing called the Council for American Democracy. And Katie, why don't I stop there? Because if we want to get into the council, I'll let you guys ask me what you want to ask. But that's my journey to this work.
Yeah, I think it's great. And like, although a unique journey, I think relatable to so many of us who have a deep respect for the country and have in some ways benefited from it, and maybe had careers that were a different direction. But ultimately, when it comes to the things we care most about, when you start looking at why isn't progress being made on this thing that clearly there's so many people that care about it, it's because of government dysfunction. And that brings us to, you know, even though we could be doing things, I'm grateful that you failed at retirement, but like you also deserve to be retired, right? Like we all could be doing like spending more time with our families or like watching more Netflix or whatever the, you know, you would want to be doing. But instead we're called in this moment to have to really lean in, because otherwise what might happen? Yes, let's hop into TCAD. That's what us on the board call it for everybody else, but the Council for American Democracy. Um, what is the council? How and why did you get involved? Obviously, you mentioned Bill, but if you can give a little bit more elaboration into why you felt like, oh yeah, that's interesting. I'll lean in because you've really leaned in on that. And then it would be great if you could kind of recap the growth to date, but kind of like the ultimate vision too.
Yeah. So, so let me set the context with a little bit about Issue One and then the council, because I think that, you know, the council is an initiative of Issue One, and I think understanding one helps understand the other. So Issue One is an organization that was founded by our still current CEO, a guy named Nick Penniman, who literally wrote the book on money and politics, and is an incredibly articulate advocate for the effective structural democracy. He was a longtime journalist. He's been involved in the democracy world for 26 years, something like that. And you know, and I think for a long time really felt that money in politics was Issue One, so to speak. That was, you know, the founding motivation for Issue One. And I think that I mean, I don't want to speak for you guys, but certainly perhaps we can all agree that at a minimum, if we don't think it's Issue One, it is increasingly an accelerate of the problems in the country. You know, the fact that the very, very rich in the country have effectively squeezed out the voices and the influence in many cases at the federal level of citizens in terms of the ability to hold their legislators to task on the things that they prioritize. But, you know, one of the things that really struck me when I was first in conversations with Bill and with Issue One was this one stat that I share a lot with people to try to help them understand this issue of the capture of our politics. And then I'll sort of make this connection to TCAD. Princeton and a couple of other universities did this longitudinal study that started like, I want to say 10 years before Citizens United. There was some other less brand name bill that was passed that started the slide of money in politics. And what they looked at was they juxtaposed every piece of legislation that had been undertaken by Congress in whatever those years were, up until I want to say 2 years ago, let's say, or a year ago. And they found something just incredibly interesting and disturbing. And so they juxtaposed it with what the polling said about where the popular alignment was around different issues. What did they care about? And so if an issue had 5% popular support, it's just 5%, think about that number, it had a 30% chance of getting legislated, right? So you can think about all the things that have so little popular support, but they get attention in Congress, right? And they get attention because powerful interests want them to get attention. Similarly, something could have 85% popular support. We all know things like that. It had the same 30% chance of getting legislated. So if you think about that, it kind of says it doesn't really matter what the public thinks, right? That legislators are really beholden to the people that are essentially paying them. And it all cycles through this whole burden of raising money because elections have gotten so expensive. And, you know, they say that now that the average legislator in a non-competitive district spends 4 hours a day fundraising, and in a competitive district spends 6 to 7 hours. And if anybody hasn't, I mean, you all are pros in this field, but if anybody listening isn't, that is sitting in a cubicle in a building like a customer service rep and dialing for dollars, getting hung up on all day long, just like you work for a call center. So imagine what time you have left to actually like legislate. It's just, we've set up a system that makes it really difficult for even the most motivated legislators to do the good work of their constituents.
Yep.
So issue one's trajectory was that they are, you know, they're deeply respected on the Hill. They have, you know, really powerful relationships across the aisle. They're, you know, they're a big and influential voice when it comes to structural democracy reform, particularly around money in politics, corruption, electoral reform, and Article 1 power. And they've, you know, they've got this council called the Reformers Caucus, which is 200 plus members of, or ex-members of Congress, cabinet secretaries, and other like senior government leaders who cross-partisan, so 40% Republican, 60% Democrat, who are really also constantly informing their work. And so at some point about a year and a half, 2 years ago, issue one was sort of saying, look, we've accomplished a lot of what we said. We wanted to be effective advocates, and we are. But what we don't bring to the table is we don't bring the people power, but sort of the threat of voting that actually is the other part of the puzzle when you're trying to move people to action in Washington. And so they decided to start with building a leadership network of individuals across the country who had potent networks in, you know, hopefully everywhere, but who could start to bring that people power to the sort of legislative and policy power that issue one had established. And so TCAD was the council was the first part of this initiative. And so we are now a group of 260-ish, 65 people in 30 states across the country, all of whom are, you know, people who have some stature in the places where we live, have experience, networks, and often financial capacity to support what is ultimately a movement building effort for issue one to build more grassroots power to support structural democracy reform. And it's a big lift because, as we all know, as you all know, because many of you are probably working on policy issues, you know, it's difficult to get people to think beyond the kitchen table, particularly in a time when prices are rising and it just people feel increasingly powerless. But we believe that it's important work to find. Our goal is 2 million people who are prepared to vote for structural reform in the 2028 elections, because we think that's about what it's going to take. And critically, in certain places, we're going to need a real critical mass of people particularly where there are some very democracy oriented Republican legislators, because no matter how things go, to get 60 votes in the Senate, we're not going to have a 60 vote coalition of either party anytime in the foreseeable future. So, so we know we're going to need a bipartisan coalition of senators at a minimum to get any structural reforms passed. And so that's the basic work of TCAT. Our goal is to be at 500 members, I don't know, in the next 12-ish months, and to be in every state in the country ideally, but certainly to be in states that are critical to the 2028 elections.
And Jamie, really quick, one of the things that when I first heard about it as board member, I was like, there's no way. But like part of the initial ask for joining was, I believe, a $5,000 donation, right?
Well, $5,000 a year commitment. Yeah.
Yeah. And so to grow from 0 to, what did you say, 260?
Yeah.
Yeah, in 1 year, year and a
yeah.
half. Yeah, I mean, and then folks are motivated too to figure out, okay, who in my network should be a part of this as well. So
right.
I don't know if there's any element related to that you want to highlight or not. You don't have to, but
no, sure. I do think it's an important question. I mean, it's a really interesting thing, because $5,000 a year on the one hand is a lot. On the other hand, in some contexts,
it's not, right?
Well, not only is it not, but we've had some members say to us, not because they were raising their hands to give us like $100,000 a year, but because they were kind of saying, does $5,000 a year move the needle? And so it is an interesting thing to calibrate if you're going to develop a leadership council and have a financial commitment tied to it. What's the right number? I tell this story a lot when you're trying to figure out pricing, so to speak. I still work with a lot of tech founders, it also in my just volunteer time. But there's a classic story about Volvo that when they came to the United States, they in Sweden, they're more like Ford, right? It's like a good quality car. It's the sort of the patriotic car, and they do have some higher end models, but it's also kind of the everyday car, right? It's the car that people drive all over. And they came to the US kind of with that in mind, but that's not how Americans saw foreign cars. And so they just weren't selling very much, because like, look, if they're going to spend whatever it was at the time, like I can just buy an American car. But if they were going to find their sweet spot, they actually had to raise their price. So it's an interesting thing to think through, like how you find that intersection of like, what's the amount that makes people feel like it's achievable, but also that it actually can have an impact and move the needle. And every effort has to calibrate that for their work and their constituency. And we have a lot of members now that are giving much more than that because that's their view. I would say that in just as guidance to, your group in thinking about how this council has taken shape, I think the things that have really appealed to people are the fact that it is determinedly cross-partisan. It definitely leans left, because right now the people that are willing to raise their hands and say they really believe in democracy and a sort of more power to the people tend to be a little more left. But we do have center Republicans. What I think, I wouldn't say there's anybody MAGA that's in the council, but we have a lot of Republicans, a lot of ex-Republicans, and a lot of people who sort of say, like, I'm not about any party anymore. I'm just about, fixing the country, and they don't care how it happens under which party. And so I do think that having a clear identity is a really critical part of building these kinds of councils too. Calibrating what your ask is around money, and then also figuring out ways for people to get to know, like when I teach movement building, I use a lot the metaphor of a loom. So if you think about, the one side of a loom, the part that goes up and down, as being like that you have a really good cause and you have people that feel like they could be impacted by the work that you do. The real strength in a movement is the part that goes back and forth and weaves the fabric together. It's how people in a movement connect with each other and feel that collectively they have power and strength. And so that's a lot of what we're doing in the council as well. We have a signal chat where people are constantly sharing news and articles and arguing about things and celebrating things that are happening. We have a regular every other week newsletter. We're constantly sharing all of issue one's research and reports and action opportunities. And then we have groups that are kind of dividing into subgroups and doing work together. So it's a pretty early but powerful model. Our official launch was May of last year, so we're a year and a month old, and we've got momentum, and we're feeling pretty excited about where we're headed.
Wow, there's so much there. I have to unpack a few things, and also, wow. First of all, I'm sure my mother-in-law is going to appreciate when I let her know that she overpaid for her Volvo. So I'm literally taking notes. And really, I mean, amazing what you did early in your, civic career with GivingTuesday as well. And I want to ask in general how folks can emulate success. But I think a lot of what you're sharing in terms of like these really specific numerical goals, these metrics, these benchmarks of success are important. And, I know Katie and I have talked a lot, for our volunteers and our donors for our movement. It's really important to say, like, this is our theory of change. If we can accomplish this big goal, like, for us in Missouri, where, by the way, Nick Penniman is from, we're going to claim him, actually, Nick's.
I'm going to tell you though. So I'm from Baltimore. I'm in Baltimore. I've been in Baltimore for 40 years now. And Nick's family goes back to 16 something in Baltimore. So I'm going to claim him too. So we can fight it out.
Okay. Well, Nick's niece worked for us at Show Me Integrity in Missouri. So
I know he grew up there, and his dad, what's the St. Louis paper? His dad was like the editor of the paper there.
At the Post-Dispatch, yeah. And his sister hosted me on a panel at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. So we're going to keep doing this.
Okay. All right. Good.
I love it.
Yeah. So shout out to Nick and everyone in Baltimore and St. Louis. But yeah, in terms of emulating your success, yeah, like, when we told folks in Missouri, like, we need 300,000 signatures and we need it by this date. And to do that, we need this many online signups by this first date, and then this many volunteers signed up by this date, and this many precinct captains. So I think what you've demonstrated, on the fundraising front is really helpful, I think, for a lot of us here. I'm literally taking notes because trying to figure out how we can take this incredible movement that we've built and make it sustainable, and that can be challenging. So thank you for modeling this success and teaching us a little bit more how to do it. You already spoke, I think, to what's currently motivating people. But if you want to share more, why are people wanting to lean in? What's compelling about this? I assume these are all 501c3 donations that, is part of what's being given and solicited from others. But what is motivating people to lean in and work on improving the civic infrastructure and democracy at large, especially because people get so hung up on the 24-hour news cycle and like, oh, the gas prices, the war, the tariffs, whatever it is. Why are they willing to work on democracy at large? What's that pitch like, or how are people coming to that? What's bringing people to the table?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's both a good news, bad news story that I would highlight. I mean, I think the people that get this without a lot of explanation are older. We all had deep civic education as kids all the way up through high school. Many of us continued into college. And I think that, and the reason I say that's a good news, bad news thing is because many of us are at the point in our lives, our council tends to be 50 plus, years old. And we're at the point in our lives where we're not scrambling for stability, particularly people that are giving $5,000 a year. And even we also have, so I should have said, we also have an elected members program, which is, for people that, we've got all these public servants and some other people that can't necessarily give at that level, but who have, really distinguished public service careers, who bring an important perspective to our work and our ability to be effective advocates for the movement that we want to build. But none of us is worrying about, like my daughter's peers, can I afford rent next month? And, and I think that's again, it's a good news, bad news thing. So we have the luxury of thinking about, why is the system broken? Instead of, how do I fix, housing affordability? And I think that those are, one is a very much a cause, the other is an effect. And so when we talk to people about, I had a call this morning with a potential council member, and the analogy I'll often use is, I think a lot of people think of democracy, again, particularly younger people, as this invisible thing, like the pipes that run under the streets in your city. Like if you think about everything that's happening under the streets of your city, it's pretty profound. Almost everything that allows you to live the life you live is happening under those streets. It's water, it's Wi-Fi infrastructure, it's electricity, it's all this stuff just, running in these pipes. And in the best of circumstances, you never have to think about them. This is going to sound counterintuitive, but in my opinion, in the next best of circumstances, you have a big fat water main break, where all at once something big happens. And why that's good is because then you can see it. It happens, you can see it, your water turns off and somebody rushes out to fix it. The big problem with our infrastructure is that the much more insidious issue is all the degradation that's just happening under our streets, that we kind of you turn on your tap one day and you're like, ooh, that doesn't look so great. But or your Wi-Fi seems slow, or your lights flicker occasionally, and you don't give it a lot of thought. But what's really happening under the ground is that the stuff is corroding while you sleep. And that's what's been happening with our democracy, is we sort of have been letting it corrode now for 30 or 40 years. And yes, occasionally there's a huge thing. There's an ICE, shootings in Minnesota, right? And so a big thing happens, it's equivalent of a water main break, and the whole country focuses on it. Something changes, but then in all these other places, quietly under the surface, where it's not, nobody's getting killed, right? So stuff just keeps happening and people aren't paying as much attention because, again, it's not the water main break, it's the more insidious stuff that's happening under the table or under the roadways. So again, I think my generation can take that perspective. And when we talk with people about it, like the woman I talked to this morning, she's like, that makes so much sense to me. And so what I'll often say is, we need these 3 critical bills. That's what we're really working toward. We call it January 2029. We're trying to come up with some frame other than D-Day, but for right now, it's just when we talk among ourselves, we talk about D-Day, where hopefully we've had these 2 million voters that have really been persuasive with their legislators that they want structural democracy reform. That's how we're thinking about it too, Benjamin, Democracy Day. But that's not how everybody thinks of D-Day. And the idea is that starting with the wedge issue of corruption and money in politics, under which would fall things like emoluments, self-dealing, Congress people trading in stocks, people on committees getting donations from lobbyists whose work is being overseen by those committees. It's that whole package of stuff that has 80% public support. That's kind of the wedge issue. The 2 other bills, one is an electoral reform bill and one is an Article 1 bill. That's the package of big structural reforms that we are working toward. And so, it's essentially like your electricity, your water, and your Wi-Fi under the roads. It's like trying to put in all new piping, for that stuff to work better. And if that stuff is fixed, then I would guess that a lot of the things that your listeners and your members think about, that they're working on ballot initiatives about, would be strengthened if there was more representative democracy at the federal level, and we were kind of fixing some of these issues that are really corroding our democracy.
100%. Yeah, some of our initiatives would not be necessary if things got passed federally, which would be great because there's plenty of other issues to hop into.
Exactly.
Also, Jamie, I've been accidentally in this field for 10 years, and that analogy is amazing. It's the best one I've heard. I'm like, what the heck? How haven't we stumbled upon that yet? There's been boat analogies and sports analogies, but I'm like, no, the infrastructure under the ground. I love it. I love the visual. It makes so much sense.
Yeah,
well,
we just had a huge water main break in St. Louis City, which happens all the time because they neglected it for so many years, never raised the water rates, didn't put the money in to maintain it. And then it opened up a 40-foot sinkhole 10 days ago. So I feel just adds to the metaphor.
Yeah.
But they're finally fixing it, and they finally voted to start making structural changes and increasing water rates to help pay for upgrades after a few years after we passed election reform, open primaries, and approval voting to make them more accountable to actually get things done. So we're totally going to use that. Anyway, sorry, Katie, back to you.
Yes, multiple ways the analogy works. I love it.
This is how movement building works. Take it, run with it.
Yes, we build upon each other. I love it. Awesome. Okay, so related to TCAD, I would love to learn a little bit more. I guess I lean a little bit more into the fundraising side of things, but also just how it kind of went from an idea to now having more members. How sounds like you're doing some one-on-one recruiting calls. I mean, is that how it's been? Any recommendations you could give to folks as they're trying to emulate that kind of success or way to start creating the buy-in?
Well, so I told you that I kind of taught movement building and this kind of civic engagement work around the world for a long time. And I do 2-day workshops on this stuff. So I'm going to try to say in 3 minutes, some of the stuff that
an extended podcast episode.
Yeah. But I will give you one kind of simple framework that I will often, when I'm starting off, trying to help aspiring movement builders think about how to grow. There's a frame I use that I know I stole from somebody somewhere, and I wish, but it's been 10, 15 years, and I honestly can't really remember who it was. So I very shamefully can't give them credit for it. So this is not mine, but I think it's effective, and I'll use it. So if you think about, I mentioned this guy, Bill, who I used to work with, who's a longtime board member of Issue 1, Katie and my colleague on that board. So every movement starts with someone who is deeply passionate about getting it off the ground for what, and there's almost always some personal reason that they are motivated to do this. So let's call that person O prime. So just the letter O prime. And if you're thinking about a visual, just imagine a dark blue dot. We're going to use red, white, and blue. A dark blue dot in the center of a white page, right? And so Bill, O prime in TCAD, Bill is a really connected guy who was, and he's a well-to-do guy. He was the head of Dartmouth's board, and he's been involved in lots and lots of democracy stuff and lots of, professional things around the country. And so Bill has a constellation network, if you think about red lines all around him of all these contacts. So Bill starts posting about the council and his aspiration for the council. And as he starts doing that and talking to friends, some people sort of say, that's interesting. So imagine in these red, this constellation of lines coming out from this blue O in the center, O prime. A few people raise their hands like me, and they become what I call A's. So now a few of these lines are people that are like, that's interesting, I'd like to hear more, or I'd like to get involved. And then you start to nurture the A's, right? This is the key to movement building. You recognize who those A's are, you start communicating with them, celebrating them, shouting them out when they join, introducing them to each other, importantly. And then from that initial group of A's, a few people will find like, this is their thing, like me, right? So then from among those A's, a few new O's emerge. So I'm an O. Bill was O prime, I'm an O, right? Now I have my constellation of networks, and I start talking with my friends, and new red lines sprout off of me. You can imagine that, right? And as I talk to my friends, like the woman I was talking to this morning, not everybody's interested, right? I do a reasonable amount, not as much as I should, posting on, LinkedIn and Instagram. And from that, I have brought in my whatever, number of people into TCAD. And from among them, about, 10-15% of the people I've brought in have become new O's. And now they're getting their people involved. And at a very practical level, beyond just the point to point, so me talking to my friends, I've also hosted probably 5 or 6 sessions now of, 30 to 75 people at a time. So I get people in a room together. That's always powerful too, because not only are they hearing from me, but they're kind of seeing the energy of the other people in the room and feeling that. And sometimes they know each other. And then, so even the people that don't necessarily say like, I'm ready to raise my hand and get involved, we're still connecting them to issue 1. We're still we get them on a list so that we can email them. Some percentage of them will become A's, and then some percentage of them will become O's. And the real final piece of this thing that I would teach over hours is that when you have O's, you have to treat them like the inner circle that they are, right? So our O's, they get like special attention from Ro, who's the VP of Citizen Engagement at issue 1. We have sessions with Nick. They get invited to things. We nurture those O's really deliberately, because they are the ones who, who essentially allow us to go from linear growth to exponential growth.
I love it.
That's really helpful, valuable advice, and really appreciated. So our coalition, tries to not only build capacity for greater and more influential progress, including movement building in similar ways you're describing, both at grassroots levels and through fundraising, but works to increase the training, the knowledge, the skill set within the democracy reform movement, how to run polls, how to, build, like a Katie Fahey style, movement infrastructure of people to gather hundreds of thousands of signatures as volunteers. So do you have other lessons from your current or past experiences that you would like to share with practitioners in the space who are building movements, who are figuring out how to, give supporters and activists and donors the kind of attention you're talking about people need? Anything that you see as transferable, what lessons could you share from your current or past experiences?
I mean, I'm not an expert. Katie would have a lot more expertise around, moving people to things like, petitions, canvassing, that kind of work. But what
We've had Katie as our guest before, but you're our guest today.
But what I will say, I'm actually gonna, I'm gonna double down on something that you brought up, which I think a lot of movement builders are afraid to do, which is to really name aspirational goals and then break down goals into sort of interim steps. Yeah. Because I think, and we went through this so our initiative in Baltimore on that second Giving Tuesday, we call Be More Gives More. Be More is what everybody in Baltimore calls it, like it for shorthand. And,
cute.
and it's BMORE, but obviously it has the double entendre. And we did a really great brand, and I, put this coalition together. But the sticking point when I was recruiting people to do this was I said, look, I want to try to raise $5 million in one day. And people thought I was insane. And I said, look, if we, people were like, why don't we say 250,000 or 500,000? I just said, like, this is the Volvo problem, right? I said, like, if that's what we do with all these organizations, and you just do the math on it, people are going to be like, like, did that matter? I mean, yeah, okay, that would be like a great goal, but like, what does it really mean? I just said, I feel like we need to go bigger. We need to be more aspirational. And with a little, and the other, I will say that the other point I made was, if we try for something that big and we fall a little short, people are going to say, well, at least we took a big fat swing, right? And so we put it out there. We talked about the $5 million. We talked about what that would mean every hour of the 24 hours. We talked about, if the average gift was X, how many people would need to give to these various organizations, and how many, civic actions and all of that. And there was a lot more to how we got some coalition efforts involved. So like the United Way and the Associated, which is the big Jewish Federation in Baltimore, and these groups with like big constituencies, so that like their engagement we knew would turbocharge things because they had like naturally connected larger constituencies. And at the end of the day, we raised $5.7 million. And, and as I said, 32,000
Awesome.
civic actions. But I will tell you one other story about that whole thing, because that big goal also got us a lot of media coverage. And, and again, this is 2013. So, people were still reading newspapers more than they are now. And there were, two big newspapers of record at that time in Baltimore. And so we got a lot of coverage in that. But because the money goal got a lot of attention, and then the stories drove. So early in the morning of Giving Tuesday of that day, and this one got so much attention that I think it drove a lot of like the emotional motivation for the day. Was a woman called us. And I know we had a phone number set up for that day in case people had questions. So a woman called us that morning, after seeing us on like the AM local news show. And she was living in an assisted living home, and she was 90 or something. And she said, look, I'm on a fixed income. I don't have any money to give. I wish I did. But she said, I have a piano that my father left me that's been in our family, for several generations. I can no longer play, and I want to be part of this day. And can you help me give this piano to a children's music organization?
Wow.
And, within an hour, we had an organization that, and she, and then we had somebody else who was prepared to pay to get it moved from her assisted living to the organization. And that was the story we put out at 11 o'clock to the new news.
Yeah.
And, and it's still to this day, like, it's just a story that just makes you realize like how much, if you can give people a big aspiration towards something that they believe in, like everybody wants to be part of it,
Totally.
So anyway, and thinking where those stories are telling like good emotional stories on top of like the stuff that is just the heavy hard work of building a movement is also really critical in my view.
Totally. It makes so much sense. And You know, it works. There was a moment in the Missouri campaign where Benjamin was like, we're gonna say it was like very similar. I think it was 2 million maybe, or do you remember Benjamin? And I was like, no, we can't say that. Like it's too much. Even though it was realistic, I was like, we absolutely need that much. And, then we went out. It must have been less than 2 million. But anyways, we reached it. And I totally agree that I think the stories are what help people connect with the mission even more and remember that like it's each of us pulling our own weight, whether we can or can't give money or a piano or whatever it is. I love that. I know we're just about at time or woodworking. Exactly. Yes. Making your own clipboards out of wood. We each have a way to contribute. Um, but, Jamie, there's a lot of people right now looking at politics and getting discouraged. But you're an example of somebody who took that feeling and instead decided to do something about it. Are you glad you have? And, what's your pitch for folks who might be on the fence on whether, is it even worth trying, or is so much of the infrastructure crumbled that we got to move towns?
I mean, I absolutely understand the weight of the discouragement. And believe me, like, since I've thrown myself into this, some days I'm like, "Ugh, really?" Like, particularly some of the Supreme Court stuff, like, just really weighs on me because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there are some battles that just everything can go right and still go wrong, and that can be really discouraging. But
Totally.
I don't know, I guess I I have a 4-week-old and a 21-month-old grandson or grandson. And and I have kids who are 35, 33, and 27. And I think a lot about the world that they'll live in, the America they'll live in if they stay here. And I guess I just have decided, like, what's the alternative other than believing we can right the ship? And what can I contribute to it? And I'm good at a few things. And so I'm doing the things I'm good at to try to make a difference.
Love it.
Jamie, it has been a real honor chatting with you and learning from you today. So before we wrap up, we want to thank you so much for your incredible work and sharing your time. How can people get involved with you and follow your work?
Well, look, I would say anybody can get involved with issue one. Just go. There's an action page on the site. You can give. You can just read their reports. If you're interested in federal democracy, like structural reform, that's definitely a way to get involved. And then if you're interested in getting involved in TCAD, as we said, there's a nominated members program. And of course, there's the normal TCAD membership that is tied to that financial commitment. But again, we have members who are not at that level, but who are really passionate about this work and who want to be involved in a more hands-on way. And more than that, I would just say thanks to all of you, because this is an all hands on deck moment, at every level of our government. And thank God you guys are doing what you're doing. So
Yeah, we each do what we can, right?
yep.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Jamie, and we'll stick on for a Q&A with everybody in a second. But if you are listening or watching and want to join the Respect Voters movement, sign up at respectvoters.org. You can donate, you can volunteer, you can hear about the active campaigns around the initiative process happening across the country, and help us protect and strengthen the initiative process so that we can renovate our democracy for the next 250 years. We're so excited for the road ahead and for the coming work to achieve a better democracy. This is Katie Fahey.
And Benjamin Singer signing off from Behind the Ballot, reminding our leaders to respect voters.
Respect voters. Thanks. All right. Thank you, Jamie. That was great. Thank you so much. And we can, yes, I see the claps.